was one of those unsaid things. He did lie about where he'd been born. He did obfuscate, especially when we were younger, because I'm 70 years old. So if you think the war was only just over when I was born, and of course people didn't know at that time that the English, Americans, whoever, were going to win the war. So it was an insecure time to be even in London. And so it wasn't such a dumb thing to deny his upbringing where he was, particularly since he wasn't brought up in any way Jewish, as in with religion or customs or anything really, not even really the food. The music, maybe, because he played the violin. So that was a bit of a giveaway. But he gave that up pretty soon after he came to England.
Let's hear about a new novel from the celebrated actor and writer Nigel Planer, who is perhaps still best known to many for his role as Neil in The Young Ones. But he's here today to tell me about the first book in his new Time Shard Chronicles series, which is a time travel fantasy trilogy, which he says is partly about processing his own father's experience as a Jew who escaped the Nazis, an identity that his father concealed from Nigel and his siblings. Nigel Planer, welcome to Times Radio.
Hello, how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Yes, not bad. It's very strange. Are we on radio or are we looking at pictures?
It's the very modern world, Nigel. We're on all forms. We're on radio, we're on Zoom. I can see you, I can hear you.
Right, fantastic.
So, Nigel, tell me first of all about Jeremiah Bourne and this new book and where he came from.
Jeremiah Born in Time is set in London. It's set in London in 2019. And Jeremiah, here it is. Jeremiah finds that he can travel in time, and he doesn't know why. It's a skill he's inherited, and through memory. There's no sort of time machine. And the thing you were saying earlier was something I only realized after I'd finished writing it. I just set about writing a comedy time travel fantasy book inspired by Terry Pratchett. I did all the audio books of Terry Pratchett years ago, and I always thought it'd be fun to have a go at that sort of thing. It was only after I'd finished writing it that I made the connection between my own background and my own upbringing and this rootless child. Well, he's not a child. He's nearly 20, and his sort of lost search for his mother. His mother's disappeared, and he finds a box with old photos in it. And rather like we did when my dad died, we found an old shoebox. It's a very common story, I think, these days, of all sorts of stuff we never knew existed in the bottom of his cupboard. And it occurred to me that that's what I'd been writing about. I mean, you never know. If you let yourself write, your subconscious give it free rein, and then you look at it afterwards and think, oh, that's what I did. I didn't realize that's what I was doing.
So tell me a little bit more about this, Nigel. So your father had escaped the Jews, but he'd never told you. Is that right? You only discovered after his death. Sorry, he was a Jew escaping the Nazis. Please forgive me. But you only found this out after he had died. Is that right?
No, we did know gradually, but it was one of those unsaid things. He did lie about where he'd been born. He did obfuscate, especially when we were younger, because I'm 70 years old. So if you think the war was only just over when I was born, and of course people didn't know at that time that the English, Americans, whoever, were going to win the war. So it was an insecure time to be even in London. And so it wasn't such a dumb thing to deny his upbringing where he was, particularly since he wasn't brought up in any way Jewish, as in with religion or customs or anything really. Not even really the food, the music maybe, because he played the violin. So that was a bit of a giveaway. But he gave that up pretty soon after he came to England, and he had, and my grandfather too, totally secular upbringing. No, they were both scientists, my grandfather and my father, and absolutely no interest in the way they were brought up, in inverted commas, being Jewish. So really, all this emphasis on identity that we're now so almost obsessed with at the moment. The last time, if my dad were alive now, the last time he would have been grilled on identity was kind of 1933, when Hitler came to power.
Yeah.
Which I find rather alarming, that we are trying to pin these labels down on people now.
That's really interesting you say that it alarms you that we're trying to pin identity down. But what did the growing sense of your dad's experiences, which as you say was never verbalized or questioned, but how do you think that affected you and your identity growing up?
Well, more than I've realized, actually. They say, don't they, that with a trauma, it's 50 years really before people can talk about it. I think there are many families in the country. I mean, my mum isn't from Europe. She was born in Ilford, I think, or Ewell. They then moved to. So my mum is completely English and not foreign. Was, and so I felt a bit like a category error. Something that's neither one thing nor the other. But I think most people are nowadays. We sort of fall between the cracks. In fact, nowadays it seems like there are more cracks than pavement. And so it's very difficult to define. Exactly who you are with your identity.
Yeah. Just back to Jeremiah Bourne for a minute, Nigel. So you talked earlier about not realising until you'd finished the book that you were processing your father's experiences. Can you just talk a little bit more about how Jeremiah, I think he finds a biscuit tin with mementos of his missing mother. I mean, that seemed to me quite an obvious link. You'd obviously, some part of your consciousness was channeling some experiences you'd had with this shoebox. Can you just talk a little bit more about in what ways you were processing this?
It's very easy to write in complete ignorance of what you're doing. I find. Yes, it is a bit obvious, isn't it? But it's only on reading it afterwards that you see it. I was focusing really on the method of time travel. The clue is in the title. He doesn't know where he's from. And the clue is in the title, his name, Jeremiah Bourne in Time. He travels back to 1910 by accident in the same house. It's not time and space continuum. It's all in the one place. You only travel in time, like a sort of inherited memory. And in the future, in the same house again, the people are looking for him, because they can all do it, travel in time, and so they don't like the idea that he's stumbling around not knowing what he's doing with this time travel skill. So they're looking out for him, and there's an adventure plot about what exactly his mother has been up to, because she disappeared 7 years ago from his life. And there are sequences when he goes back into his own earlier life, that terrible thing in time travel stories where, do I go back and see myself? Will I be there? Can I change history? But I use it mostly, in fact, I use all of it for comic effect, really. It's maybe that's what makes it possible to not see what you're doing, because you're working out a serious plot that will work and be exciting.
And you're making humour in,
characters. I love doing lots and lots of characters who have silly voices.
Well, and I hope you'll do them all on the audiobook yourself as well. Now, Nigel, this is the first of 3. Have you got the rest of them plotted out? Do you know what's going to happen, where Jeremiah's going to go, where the story's going to go?
Yes, I've got the second one in notes, messy notes, but I also have a structure. I prefer to work to a structure, even if you then ignore it once you started. I'm not going back to 1910, but I will stick with the plot in the future because it's quite interesting to me. In 1910, he finds a group of theosophists.
Can you explain to people who don't know what a theosophist is?
Yeah, it was there were a lot of things like this in the turn of the century. They sort of rope-sandaled, nudist, New Age vegetarians, which we don't normally think of the Edwardian and Victorian era as having a lot of those kind of people. But there were the Theosophical Society, which is quite fun. It's funny that he goes back and finds that, but also they were into eugenics. A lot of early socialists were into eugenics. The Nazi Party, as we all know, was the National Socialist Party. Bernard Shaw, for instance, famous socialist playwright, believed in eugenics, felt that if people didn't want to join the socialist revolution, they should be shot or put in gas ovens. There's actually a quote in the book where Bernard Shaw, our great socialist BBC hero, is recommending gas ovens for people. So it's quite chilling. That was in the 30s.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that there are some countries in Europe that didn't really abandon eugenics until the 80s. It's terrifying. Nigel, we're going to have to wrap this up in a minute, I'm afraid. Yeah. But before we let you go, I want to ask you, I'm really sorry to ask this because you're probably fed up of people asking about it all the time. But do people always still want to ask you about Neil the hippie? And is the young ones just as relevant as ever?
Well, yes and yes. Yes, I even had the other day, I was walking down the street talking to someone and I got recognition, I got recognized from somebody behind me. They couldn't see me, but they heard my voice and they recognized that and came up and said, "Oh, Neil," or threw a snowball at me or whatever it was. Yes, I do get that all the time. I don't know about the young ones being relevant today. It was a bit of a game changer, but comedy is comedy, and if it's funny, people laugh, and it's a sort of. I like to see comedy more as a continuum than I look at the continuity of it rather than the changes.